Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The old screen door had been a thorn in my side for what felt like an eternity, ever since that rogue gust of wind during last spring's big storm had wrenched it half off its hinges. It hung there crooked and forlorn, a constant reminder of things left undone. A symbol, perhaps, of the way I'd been feeling lately, a little battered, a little stuck. I'm Carol, by the way. Most days, it's just me and the quiet hum of the refrigerator in this house that suddenly feels too big for one person. My Tom, bless his soul, has been gone nearly 5 years now, and the silence he left behind still rings louder than any storm. I'd gotten a few quotes to fix the door, of course. Young men with tool belts slung low and prices that made my eyes water. Supply chain issues, one had mumbled, not meeting my gaze. Inflation, another had shrugged, already looking past me to his next, probably more lucrative job. So the door had stayed broken, a daily sigh every time I looked at it. Then, yesterday, Sarah from next door, bless her cotton socks, had popped her head over the fence while I was attempting to tame my unruly rose bushes. Sarah's a good 30 years younger than me, full of pep, always juggling her 2 kids and a part-time job. Carol, she called out, her voice bright as the morning sun. I heard you were having trouble with that screen door. My Mark is pretty handy. You know, he could take a look if you like. He's got a bit of time off this week. Mark, her husband, I didn't know him well. Saw him mowing their lawn on Saturdays. A sturdy, quiet man, usually with headphones on, lost in his own world. He'd always offer a polite wave if our eyes met, but that was about the extent of our interactions. Sarah was the social butterfly of the pair. The thought of him, a near stranger, pottering about my porch made me hesitate for a moment. But the image of that sagging door and the memory of those exorbitant quotes pushed me to nod. Oh, Sarah, that would be wonderful, I'd said, trying to match her breezy tone. Are you sure he wouldn't mind? Not at all. He loves tinkering. I'll send him over tomorrow morning, if that's all right. And so, tomorrow morning arrived, along with a gentle knock that wasn't quite on the front door, but rather on its frame, as if he was testing its remaining stability. I smoothed down my cotton house dress, a faded floral print that had seen better days, much like the door, took a deep breath, and opened up. There he was, Mark. He was taller than I remembered from across the fence, with kind eyes, the color of warm honey, crinkling a little at the corners when he offered a small, almost shy smile. He had a smattering of silver in his dark hair, mostly at the temples, and his hands, I noticed, looked strong and capable, holding a modest toolbox. Not one of those giant, everything but the kitchen sink contraptions the other handyman had lugged around. Morning, Carol, he said, his voice softer than I expected, a gentle baritone. Sarah said you had a screen door that needed some persuasion. Mark, thank you so much for coming, I replied, stepping back to let him in, gesturing towards the offending door. Persuasion is putting it mildly. It's been staging a rebellion. He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound that seemed to settle some of my earlier apprehension. He set his toolbox down with a quiet clink and approached the door, his movements unhurried, methodical. He didn't just look at it. He studied it, running a hand along the warped frame, gently testing the loose hinges. It was the way he touched it, almost respectfully, that first caught my attention. The other men had prodded it, yanked at it, as if it were an adversary. Mark treated it like a patient in need of care. I see the problem, he murmured, more to himself than to me. The wood split here, and this hinge is completely shot. But I think we can save the frame itself. Might take a bit of work, though. Oh, Please take your time, I said. I'm just grateful to have someone look at it who doesn't immediately want to replace the whole thing for a king's ransom. I found myself hovering by the doorway, an uncharacteristic urge to stay, to watch, bubbling up. Usually, I'd retreat into the kitchen, let workmen get on with their tasks. But there was something about Mark's quiet competence, his gentle demeanor, that made me want to linger. The morning sun slanted through the front windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a familiar ballet I usually ignored. My living room, with its slightly worn armchair where Tom used to sit and read his newspapers, the bookshelf overflowing with novels I hadn't touched in months, the faint scent of lavender polish I used on the old mahogany coffee table, it all suddenly felt exposed, seen through new eyes. I wondered what he thought of it, of this quiet, slightly faded life I lived. He glanced up from his examination of the door, his gaze briefly meeting mine. "It's a lovely old house, Carol," he said, as if sensing my thoughts. "They don't build them with this kind of character anymore." His words warmed me, a simple observation that felt like a compliment, not just to the house, but to me, its keeper. "Thank you, Mark," I said, a genuine smile finding its way to my lips. "It's seen a lot of years, a lot of life." He nodded, then turned back to the door. "Well, let's see if we can give this old soldier a bit more life, too." He opened his toolbox, and the metallic scent of oil and tools mingled with the lavender. He selected a few items, his movements economical, precise, and as he began to work, a comfortable silence settled between us, punctuated only by the scrape of a tool, the occasional soft hum from Mark as he concentrated. It wasn't an awkward silence, not the kind that begs to be filled. It was peaceful, and in that peace, something unexpected began to stir within me, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd missed so dearly. It was the simple comfort of another thoughtful presence in my quiet home. And that, in itself, was a small shock, a gentle ripple in the still waters of my days. He worked for a good hour, and I found myself making excuses to stay nearby. I dusted the already clean mantelpiece, rearranged the magazines on the coffee table that no one ever read, and then, feeling a bit silly for my hovering, I finally asked, "Mark, can I get you something? A glass of water? Lemonade, perhaps? I made a fresh batch yesterday." It was true. I often made lemonade, a habit from when Tom was alive. He'd loved it, especially on warm days. Mark paused, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. He looked up, his honey-colored eyes meeting mine again, and this time his smile was a little wider, a little less reserved. "Lemonade sounds wonderful. Carol, thank you." As I went to the kitchen, the clinking of ice in the glasses seemed unusually loud in the quiet house. I poured the lemonade, my hands not quite as steady as they usually were. It wasn't nerves, not exactly. It was more like an awareness, a heightened sense of the moment. He was just the neighbor's husband, here to fix a door. That's all it was. But as I carried the two tall, sweating glasses back to the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this ordinary Tuesday morning was turning out to be anything but. He had managed to coax the old screen door back into a semblance of straightness. The frame was still propped, but he was meticulously working on the hinges now, whistling a soft, tuneless melody. It was a comfortable sound, a working sound. I handed him his lemonade, and our fingers brushed for the briefest of moments. A tiny spark, like static electricity on a dry day, but it made me catch my breath just for a second. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he gave no sign, just took a long drink of the lemonade. "Ah, that's the ticket," he said, sighing contentedly. "Perfect, Carol. Thank you." He set the glass down on a coaster I'd quickly fetched, then picked up his screwdriver. Shouldn't be too much longer now. This old wood is a bit stubborn, but it's good quality. Just needs a bit of convincing. I settled into Tom's old armchair, the one I rarely use myself anymore. It felt strange, sitting there, watching another man work in our home. Not wrong, just different, unfamiliar. Sarah mentioned you're handy, I said, making conversation. She wasn't exaggerating. He chuckled, a warm sound that filled the space between us. I enjoy working with my hands. Always have. Beats sitting behind a desk all day, that's for sure. He glanced up, a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher in his eyes. Used to be a draftsman years ago, all precise lines and numbers. This, he gestured with the screwdriver towards the door, this is more organic. You have to feel your way through it, sometimes. His words resonated with me more than he could know. My life had been full of precise lines, too, routines and expectations. And lately, it had felt like I was just going through the motions, the feeling long gone. I watched him, the careful way he tightened a screw, the focused line of his brow. There was a dedication there, a quiet passion for making something right again. It was oddly captivating. We talked a little more as he worked, about gardens. He admired my struggling roses, offering a few gentle tips, and about the changing neighborhood. Nothing profound, just easy conversation that flowed like a gentle stream. He mentioned he and Sarah had moved here about 10 years ago, wanting a good place for their kids to grow up. He spoke of his children with a quiet pride that was lovely to hear. I found myself telling him about Tom, about our early years in this house, stories I hadn't shared with anyone in a long time. It felt natural, talking to him. He was a good listener, nodding in the right places, his expression thoughtful. There was no pretense, no awkwardness, just two people sharing a quiet morning, one fixing a door, the other, well, I wasn't sure what I was doing, other than feeling a sense of companionship that had been absent for too long. It was the way he looked at me when I spoke, with genuine interest, as if my small stories mattered. That was the thing. It wasn't just about the door anymore. It was about this unexpected connection, this feeling of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in what felt like a very long time. And the surprising warmth that spread through me was a shock, yes, but the kind that makes you feel suddenly, wonderfully alive. The old house didn't feel quite so empty, with his quiet industry filling it. It felt like a home again, if only for a few hours. The final screw turned, and Mark stepped back, a satisfied expression on his face. "There we go, Carol," he said, his voice carrying a note of quiet triumph. "Good as new, well, almost good as old and well-loved. How about that?" He reached for the handle, a simple black, wrought iron piece that I'd always liked, and pulled the screen door open. It moved smoothly, silently, for the first time in over a year. Then he closed it, and it latched with a soft, definitive click. The sound was music to my ears. "Oh, Mark," I exclaimed, getting up from the armchair, a genuine, unrestrained smile spreading across my face. "It's perfect. I can't believe it. It hasn't closed that well in years, not even before the storm. I think." I walked over and tried it myself, opening and closing it a couple of times. The simple, satisfying thud as it met the frame, secure and straight, filled me with an absurd amount of joy. It was more than just a fixed door. It was a small victory over the creeping neglect that had started to feel like a permanent resident in my life. He was watching me, a gentle smile playing on his lips, his eyes reflecting my own pleasure. "Glad I could help," he said. "It's a sturdy old door. Just needed a bit of understanding." "You're a miracle worker," I declared, turning back to him. "Seriously, Those other fellows wanted to tear the whole thing out. I hesitated for a moment, then plunged ahead. What do I owe you, Mark? For your time and whatever materials you used. I reached for my purse, which I'd left on the side table. He held up a hand, shaking his head. Oh no, Carol, please. It was my pleasure. Just a few screws and a bit of wood glue. I had them in the shed. Consider it a neighborly gesture. But your time? I protested. You've been here for hours. I can't let you. Honestly, he interrupted gently, his gaze steady and sincere. I enjoyed it. It was nice to do something a little different. And he added, a hint of a twinkle in his eye, that lemonade was excellent payment. I felt a blush creep up my neck. It had been so long since I'd felt flustered in this way. A pleasant, warm confusion. Well, if you're absolutely sure. I am, he affirmed. He began to pack his tools away, each one placed neatly back into its designated spot in the toolbox. The methodical way he did everything was so calming. Sarah will be happy to know it's all sorted. She worries, you know. She's a dear, I said, meaning it. Sarah's thoughtfulness had, after all, led to this morning. As he closed the lid of his toolbox with a quiet snap, an idea sparked in my mind, born of the comfortable rapport we'd established and a desire not to let this unexpected connection simply evaporate with his departure. Mark, I began a little shyly. I know you said the lemonade was payment enough, but I made a big pot of beef stew yesterday. Tom always said it was my specialty. There's far too much for just me. Would you, and Sarah like to have some for your dinner? I could pack it up for you. He paused, toolbox in hand, and looked at me. There was a moment of silence where I suddenly worried I'd overstepped, presumed too much. But then his smile returned, wider this time, reaching his eyes and making them crinkle even more. Carol, that's incredibly kind of you. I don't think Sarah or I could say no to that. Homemade beef stew sounds amazing. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a quiet warmth. Wonderful, I said, my voice brighter than it had been in days. Just let me get it for you. I hurried to the kitchen, my steps lighter than they'd been all morning. The aroma of the stew, which had been simmering gently, suddenly seemed richer, more inviting. I found a couple of large containers and ladled generous portions into them, my heart feeling surprisingly full. It was such a simple thing, sharing food, but it felt significant, a way to extend the warmth of the morning, to repay his kindness in a way that felt personal and genuine. When I returned to the living room, he was standing by the newly fixed door, looking out through the clean screen. The sunlight streamed in, and for a moment, he seemed almost a part of the house, a familiar, comforting presence. He turned as I approached, taking the containers with a grateful murmur. This looks and smells incredible, Carol, he said, his eyes meeting mine. And in that look, I saw something more than just gratitude for stew. I saw a flicker of that same quiet understanding that had been present all morning, a recognition of a shared moment that was, in its own way, quite special. I hope you both enjoy it, I said, walking him to the now perfectly functioning screen door. He opened it, and it swung outward with a smooth, satisfying whisper. We will, he assured me. He stepped onto the porch, then turned back. Thank you again for the lemonade, Carol, and for the conversation. Thank you, Mark, I replied, my voice a little softer than I intended. For everything, the door, it's made such a difference already. He nodded, that kind smile still in place. Take care, Carol. You too, Mark. And then he was gone, walking down the porch steps and across the lawn towards his own house, the containers of stew swinging gently by his side. I stood there for a moment, watching him go, the screen door resting perfectly in its frame. The house felt quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the hollow silence of loneliness. It was a softer, more peaceful quiet, imbued with the lingering warmth of his presence, the echo of our shared conversation, and the satisfying click of a mended door. I turned back into my living room. The dust motes still danced in the sunlight, but the room didn't feel quite so faded anymore. It felt touched. I walked over to Tom's armchair and sat down, really sat down in it, for the first time in what felt like years, without that familiar pang of grief being the dominant emotion. Instead, I felt a gentle sense of contentment, and something else too, a sense of awakening. What had happened was simple on the surface. My neighbor's husband came to fix the door, but it was what happened within that simplicity that had shocked me in the quietest, most unexpected way. It was the shock of connection, the surprise of feeling a genuine human warmth when I hadn't even realized how cold I'd become. It was the realization that even in the ordinary course of a Tuesday morning, something could shift, something could open up, not unlike the newly repaired door. And as I sat there, in the stillness of my home, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and a nascent stirring of hope, a feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, there were still new doors to be opened in my life. The experience wasn't dramatic, no fireworks or grand declarations. It was something far more precious, a quiet mutual respect, a gentle unfurling of shared humanity between two people who had, until that morning, been little more than distant neighbors. It was a reminder that kindness exists, that connection can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes all it takes is a broken door to let a little light in. And that, I realized, was a truly wonderful kind of shock. The rest of the day passed in a gentle haze of reflection. Every time I walked past the screen door, perfectly aligned and secure, I felt a small jolt of pleasure, not just for its repaired state, but for what its mending had represented. Mark's quiet competence had not only fixed a physical part of my home, but had also, in a way, patched up a little corner of my spirit. It wasn't that I was suddenly a different person, but rather that a part of me that had been dormant, perhaps a little walled off since Tom's passing, had been gently nudged awake. Late that afternoon, Sarah called. Her voice was full of warmth. "Carol, that stew was absolutely divine. Mark couldn't stop raving about it, and the kids even asked for seconds, which, believe me, is high praise." I smiled, genuinely pleased. "Oh, I'm so glad you all enjoyed it, Sarah. It was the least I could do. Mark was such a help with the door. It's like new. He really enjoyed meeting you properly," Sarah continued. "He came home saying how nice it was to chat with you. He said your lemonade was the best he's ever had, by the way." I chuckled. He's a flatterer. But her words warmed me. It was nice to know the feeling of connection had been mutual. "No, he meant it," Sarah insisted. "He also said, well, he said you have a lovely way about you, Carol, a real gentleness. He's often quiet, Mark is, but he observes a lot, you know?" Her words caught me off guard. A lovely way about me. Gentleness? It had been a long time since anyone had said something like that to me, or perhaps a long time since I'd been able to truly hear it. I felt a faint blush rise again. That's very kind of him to say, Sarah." "Well, it's true," she said simply. "Anyway, I just wanted to call and say thank you again. And Carol, if you ever need anything else, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask Mark or me. We're just next door." "Thank you, Sarah. That means a lot," I said, and I truly meant it. The barrier between our houses, once just a fence, now felt like less of a division, and more like a friendly boundary between connected lives. After we hung up, I wandered into my small garden. The roses Mark had commented on did look a bit straggly. I remembered his gentle suggestion about pruning. Maybe I would tackle that tomorrow. Maybe it was time to tend to a few other neglected things too, not just in the garden, but in my life. His visit had reminded me of the simple satisfaction of making things right, of nurturing and mending. Later that evening, as dusk settled, I sat on my porch swing, a light blanket over my lap, even though the air was still mild. The newly fixed screen door stood as a silent sentinel. I could hear the distant sounds of the neighborhood, children's laughter fading as bedtime approached, the murmur of a television from a nearby house, the chirp of crickets tuning up for their nightly symphony. These were familiar sounds, yet tonight they felt different, less like a backdrop to my solitude, and more like a comforting presence, a reminder that I was part of a larger tapestry, even if my own thread had felt a little frayed lately. I thought about Mark, about his kind eyes and his capable hands, about the easy way we had talked, skipping over the awkwardness of near strangers and landing somewhere much more comfortable. There was no romantic illusion there. Not for a woman my age, not for a man happily married to a lovely woman like Sarah. That wasn't the shock I'd experienced. The shock was the unexpected depth of human connection, the sudden realization that my capacity for it hadn't diminished, even if it had been hidden away. It was the surprising joy of being seen, not as the widow down the street or the quiet older lady, but just as Carol, a person with stories to tell and a kindness to offer. It made me think about Tom, too, not with the sharp ache of fresh grief that had been my companion for so long, but with a gentle fondness, a soft nostalgia. I imagined him smiling, pleased that the door was fixed, pleased that I had found a moment of genuine connection. He had always worried about me being lonely after he was gone. Perhaps he would see this as a sign that I was learning to navigate the world without him, not by forgetting him, but by continuing to live, to open myself up to new experiences, however small. What happened next wasn't some dramatic, life-altering event in the grand scheme of things. Mark didn't sweep me off my feet. We didn't confess undying secret feelings. What happened next was internal, a shift in my own landscape. He fixed a door, yes, but he also unwittingly opened one within me, a door to a renewed appreciation for simple kindness, for shared moments, for the quiet strength found in reaching out, however tentatively. The experience with Mark taught me that sometimes the most profound discoveries are not loud or earth-shattering, but quiet whispers that gently rearrange your perspective. It was about mutual respect, his respect for my home, my stories, and my age, and my respect for his skill, his quiet dignity, and his family. It was about personal discovery, finding that I was still capable of easy conversation, of feeling a spark of joy in another's company, of offering and receiving kindness without expectation. As the stars began to prick the darkening sky, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The house behind me felt solid, comforting. The mended door was a symbol, I decided, not of something ending, but of something being restored, made whole again. And perhaps so was I in some small, significant way. The shock wasn't that the neighbor's husband fixed the door. The shock was that in doing so, he helped me fix a little piece of myself. And for that, I would always be grateful. The world felt a little brighter, a little more hopeful, all because of an ordinary act of kindness on an ordinary Tuesday morning. And I knew with a quiet certainty that I wouldn't let that feeling fade away anytime soon. I would carry it with me, a reminder that connection and warmth can be found where and when you least expect them.